My name's Steve Lacoff. I'm with Comcast Wholesale Services. I'm going to be the moderator for today's panel. Just to set it up and provide a little bit of context, the focus of this is obviously going to be linear channels, linear streaming. I think traditionally, linear channels and streaming has been about ubiquity, right? Providing content to consumers the way they want it, on the screen they want it, when they want it, and driving that experience. I think as we've seen streaming hit the mainstream and enter the mainstream, obviously quality has become a much bigger factor, right? Specifically trying to replicate traditional expectations around broadcast quality. And so that's really going to be the focus of this panel. Obviously building out the stack to reach ubiquity isn't trivial. But when you start thinking about how to enhance the quality, that makes things more challenging and introduces some specific issues that we're going to try to touch on. We've got a great panel here. We've got a good mix of solution providers, content owners, broadcasters, a good mix of business and monetization models, types of content, audience sizes. So I think this will be very informative, as everyone on the panel shares their experiences and talks about, some of the specific challenges that they've run up to and how they think about optimizing quality and delivering a seamless experience. With that, we can just start off with introductions. I'll go first. Again, I'm Steve Lacoff. I'm with Comcast Wholesale Services. I assume most of you are familiar with Comcast, but may not have deep awareness of Comcast Wholesale Services. Just a couple of sentences around what we do. Comcast Wholesale Services is a division within Comcast where we're focused working with content providers, media and entertainment companies, gaming companies, really to help them bridge the delivery of their content over the internet and over the top. We have, what we think is a pretty unique mix of infrastructure and cloud software, right? So through our Comcast infrastructure, we've got a fairly robust linear acquisition capability. So we've got a very large earth station in Denver that provides satellite and fiber acquisition. We've got a whole suite of infrastructure around media processing, right? So encoding, compression, packaging, security capabilities on top of that. We've got our Comcast CDN, which we built from the ground up. We own and operate. It's deployed across 92 nodes. And then we also have our backbone network, which we built out. Now, in addition to all that infrastructure, we also have software services. So the platform is part of Comcast Wholesale Services, and that provides a fairly unique capability around workflow, content management, and driving the play-out experience and analytics there. So, Eric, you want?
Yeah, so I'm Eric Schvimmer. I'm with Bloomberg Consumer Media. I run the engineering teams responsible for all of our consumer-facing experiences, basically the ones that are not subscription-based. We were an early entrant into the online video space, mainly through necessity, because we were late to the game starting our business network, our TV station, and as a result, had a little trouble getting placement on some of the traditional MSO platforms. So we decided to go whole hog into video, and I guess you'll hear some more about it as we go on in the panel.
I'm Lionel Bringuier from Elemental Technologies. So Elemental Technologies, we are a technology vendor specialized in software-defined video platforms. So basically, we are providing encoders, transcoders, origin servers with just-in-time packaging, just-in-time DRM capabilities. I'm director of product management for what we call the video delivery products, so mainly the origin packaging stuff.
My name is Jonas. I'm from Twitch. For you that doesn't know what Twitch is, we're about the largest gaming broadcasting site on the web. We have about 100 million unique viewers that use the gaming content every week. We have 1.5 million unique broadcasters every month on our site. It's been an extremely large phenomenon that has grown over the years. And I help larger broadcasters understand our workflow and come into our site and start using their content on our service, basically.
Okay, great. Before we get into, I guess, the specific topic of quality, I think the first question is going to be centered around building out the infrastructure and what were some of the considerations as each of you were building out, your technology and workflow stack for linear streaming. If you could just talk about what were some of the considerations that you had in terms of thinking about whether you want to leverage an outsourced managed solution versus building something in-house that you want to own and operate. And Eric,
So you're looking at me, yeah. So, I think the considerations we had when we first started to do it versus what they are now are very different. Rewind, say, 4 or 5 years ago, the world was a much different place. The expertise, our level of expertise, was mainly in our broadcast engineering area as opposed to how we get this stuff out on the net. So the route we went and acquired a lot of our own encoding equipment, but on the actual platform itself, the player itself, we went with partners, and that allowed us to get out there very quickly and get a product out that we could be proud of. But as the space evolved and as our needs evolved, things started to change, and as a result, we did insource some of those different capabilities. Mainly around our ability to do content management because of our unique workflows and workflow needs. We used a lot of our own proprietary stuff. And then eventually, about 2 years ago, we insourced the player as well as some of the capabilities around being able to use multiple CDNs as well as metrics. So it's a different space, but I think our experience, the way you would want to face this really depends on your situation. I can't sit here and say that one's better than the other. It's really what your business needs are and what you're trying to achieve and what's your time frame for achieving it.
Yeah.
That's a long answer.
Were there, if you think about, if we take, for example, your encoding stack, right? Were there specific considerations or, specific contributing factors like content type or audience size or things that you were trying to accomplish from a business model perspective that really influenced that?
Well, I think mainly it was just the state of technology back in 5 years ago, right? Yeah. There weren't a whole lot of opportunities for feeding that out without losing a lot of control. I think you look at the space today, I'm almost 99% sure if we do this again today, which we'll soon have to do because the capital equipment is getting old and it's time to replace it, we are going to use some sort of form of outsourcing for that, some probably cloud-based services. But back then, the consideration was you really didn't have much choice.
Yeah. Okay. And then, Lionel, you've got an interesting perspective, in terms of working for Elemental and seeing a lot of different implementations. Could you talk a little bit about how, with some of the implementations that you've done with customers, what some of their considerations were and how they considered using you versus
internal technologies. Yeah, I'm a true believer of all the building ecosystems, effective ecosystems, providing the best of breed technology. And as Eric said, we, as a technology provider, we are selling encoders, transcoders, origin servers. We are not selling content management systems, workflow management systems, players. And what we see on the market is a lot of customers have commercial workflow management systems or content management systems or players, but some of them also build their own players or CMSs. And we have to work with all of them. On top of that, there are now 2 models for deploying those services. You have the good old on-prem model with your head-end being totally managed by yourself, or you can also have the cloud model, which is becoming more and more important. And we have to fit in both ecosystems, and depending on our customers, depending on the content they have, the type of content, depending on the audience, we're talking about live channels, but even for live channels, sometimes you have big variations on the demand. For example, we were powering the last World Cup of soccer last summer, so it's up to 8 matches at the same time, 8 games at the same time, and you can have up to 8 different cameras. So you have 64 streams to be encoding at the same time, but only for 3 hours. And the fact that we can provide solutions that are totally elastic with our cloud platform enables our customers to minimize the costs, because only when the transcoding is required, they're charged for that, not for the capacity for 64 cameras all the time.
Great.
I bet it can be also for you the same kind of thing. You may have a lot of demand depending on the games you're
Twitch
streaming.
is a different beast since we have 1.5 million unique broadcasters every month, which means like at our size, it's very hard to, we ingest about, that makes the math down to about 4 hours of live video per second right now we ingest. And that makes it very hard to use an existing solution. So for us, it was very important to build from scratch. We had to like rethink how do you do video at this scale? How do you actually like manage this amount of incoming video and distribute it to our viewers? So we probably looked at different solutions, but in the end we had to build it from ourselves because there were no one that could match our size when it comes to solution-wise.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's interesting about Twitch is you guys have actually taken the step to build out your own CDN.
We have the majority of our traffic on CDN, yes.
Yeah, and was that, I mean, do you have a sense of what, was that driven principally by scale, by your unique business rules, by the type of content?
Well, again, at the scale we have, it's very important to, since we want to deliver very high quality to our viewers, and our viewers are extremely picky if you compare to other people. They demand like very high frame rate, they demand very high frame rate at very long times. So they have this very high idea of what the quality of service is. So for us, having the CDN and being able to control the experience is very important for us. So I think that was a key decision.
Okay. And I think one of the other things to talk about is just some of the specific challenges or use cases in various areas of the stack. So, Eric, when you've thought about things like authentication and authorization, security, how you scale, how you build out redundancy, you can pick. But I mean, could you
Sure.
dive into a couple of specific challenges that you ran into and how you addressed it?
So first, I'm lucky in that I'm one of the few probably content providers here who don't have to worry too much about authentication and DRM. Because we were late to the game with the MSOs, we were fortunate in being able to negotiate agreements where we owned our digital rights. So I can pretty much do anything I want, which makes my life a whole lot easier than most other people who have to deal with this issue. So, to specifically answer your question, some of the biggest challenges I think are evolving as the ad marketplace. That's our primary driver right now, is the ad marketplace and some of the challenges that exist there with how we do ad insertion, and also dealing with the proliferation of devices. We went the route of developing our own player using the OSMF platform. Works great for desktop in the HDS world, but when you start dealing with things in the HLS world and the different variations of mobile devices, this is where things get really difficult and it gets hard to maintain that experience consistently, and especially for ad insertion. So I think that's one of the big ones, and we're evolving there, continuing to try to figure out what's the best way. I don't know that I've solved it. Actually, if you guys have, I'm open to it. Please let me know.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm just not too smart.
Lionel, you want to touch on some of the challenges?
I think I can take the 2 points from Eric, because those are really the 2 points I'm also seeing a lot from our customers. The proliferation of devices. If we take, well, just a few years back, we talk about live linear streaming. A few years back, it was very easy because you were streaming your MPEG-TS streams to set-top boxes. It was all in a managed network, so very high quality because you had the full control down to the set-top box on the customer premises, really. Today, this model is totally over because the customers, they have iPads, they have Apple TVs, they have Android tablets, they have desktops with various browsers on it. And you don't have a full end-to-end control. So you have to deal with the fact that they are changing very rapidly their devices, because there are always new devices that are more sexy than the previous generation. And also, if it's not depending on the customers, sometimes it's depending on third-party providers. One of the examples, so you were talking about the players, the OSM, you built your own player around OSMF. We've seen a lot of customers building their players on Silverlight to do smooth streaming with Player Ready for DRMs. And you may know that the latest Chrome build, the Chrome browser, 42, they just dropped the support for the NP API, NP meaning Netscape plugin API. So basically, you're not able to stream Silverlight content to Chrome browsers anymore. So you have to deal with that. And technology vendors like Elemental Technologies, we have solutions for that. We can provide, with our origin server, we have just-in-time packaging capabilities. So we can provide the content in MPEG-Dash with common encryption and Widevine so that it's natively supported by the browsers. And it's a never-ending race. So we need to provide new technologies very rapidly. MPEG-Dash is the hot topic right now. I'm pretty sure in 6 to 12 months there will be a new DRM flavor or a new variant of HLS, MPEG-Dash, whatever, new subtitles format, for example, that you have to support. And the second point was about ad insertion. So maybe, today monetization is done through ad insertion. What we see on the market is the ad insertion was traditionally done on the client side. So it was client-side ad insertion with the player getting the ads from different ad agencies. And today, this model is also not a good model anymore because you have ad blockers. I can give you some stats. We have a European customer. It's a broadcaster. Between January 2014 and January 2015, in January 2014, 15% of their users were using ad blockers. It's 66% January this year. So everyone is using ad blockers. So switching from client-side insertion to server-side insertion is also something we can provide, and that drives the monetization back to the server side.
Twitch, for broadcasters, we primarily sell ads, but we also sell subscriptions. Our content is free for everyone, so everyone can broadcast for free, and we distribute all the content for free. But on top of that, you can subscribe to channels and get extra features. So for example, you can, as a broadcaster, you want to provide some extra emoticons in the chat, or you want to have some extra small stuff that gives people this feeling of connectedness. So we enable people to subscribe. And that's basically the entire monetization model of Twitch together with ads. Regarding, I would say yes. No, but it's very hard. It's like our kind of expectations for what our platform is so different from what people have, the problems that people usually have with their platforms. Is the people that commit their content to us, they produce their content themselves. They want to give the content to us, and they want it to be viewed for free. They only they want people to view them. So for us, it's a totally different thing. Since we have to think about instead of thinking about how do we monetize, it's more how can our broadcasters enable people to subscribe to them compared to what the linear TV faces.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's move into the actual topic of quality. So, I think one of the things that would be interesting for everyone to hear from each of you is, how do you think about quality, right? When is good enough? How do you define quality? What are the specific metrics you look at to define that experience?
So I think there's two answers to that question. I'm assuming you want me first.
Sure.
Since I'm to your left.
Yeah.
And you're giving me that look.
Yeah.
There's two answers to that question. First, there's what we think we're measuring for quality, and then there's what the end user's actually seeing. And I'm not sure that we know the answer to the latter one as well as we should. It's an opportunity in this space. So the metrics we look at in our particular world is we're looking at buffering, percent buffering, time to start, number of starts being abandoned, and average bit rate. Those are but if you really think about it, they're sort of in some ways, it's after the effect. This has already happened. So you've already screwed up if you have bad metrics in any one of these. It'd be nice to be able to actually predict what those things are. The other thing is that you go to two different vendors to get statistics on these things, and you're going to get two different sets of numbers. It's not ubiquitous. We do a lot of this monitoring at the player level using third parties. And there's a lot of different solutions out there, but this is also a very nascent space, much like everything here. It's ripe for evolving. At the end of the day, despite what any of these things look like, these numbers on a dashboard, it's about what your customer has. And I think the most relevant one that we look at that I didn't mention yet is how many times do they come back, or do they not? And if you've got a good experience and you bring people back, that tells us that we're doing something right.
Lionel?
Yeah. On that topic, if you look at quality, there is also picture quality. And today it's becoming more and more challenging because we talk about adaptive bitrate technologies, and we have bigger and bigger screens, 4K content, and we also have smaller and smaller screens, maybe not with the smartphones because smartphones are getting bigger too, but now you have smartwatches and so on. So you have, a few years back, we used to have maybe 5, 6 different encoding profiles. Today, most of our customers, they have over 10 profiles, 10, 11, 12 different encoding profiles. And for 4K content, maybe you will have 5 or 10% of your customers being able to watch 4K content because they have a 4K device and a 4K screen. So talking about average bit rates, I think you should have something more precise and different groups depending on the devices. Today, the main screen is still the TV, but for example, my kids, when they say I'm watching TV, actually they're watching an iPad, and that's their main screen for them. So maybe you don't need 4K content, maybe 1080p is good enough for the majority of your customers. And we have techniques for that in Elemental Delta, our origin and just-in-time packager. We have the ability to define what we call stream sets. And depending on the devices you're addressing, we can limit only the relevant bit rates to the devices. For example, if you have, let's say, an iPad, you will be limited to 1080p at 4 megabits per second. If you have an iPhone 4 or an iPhone 5, you can be limited to 720 because on a 4-inch screen, you will not notice any difference between 720 and 1080p. But the bandwidth will go from maybe 3 megabits per second down to 2 megabits per second. So the user experience will be better, and that's finally the only metrics you can trust.
For us, it's every broadcaster has their own encoder. So we have people running simple small broadcasters running their computers, doing x64 encoding with their games, up to people using Elementals from you. We have the entire range of people using different encoders. And gaming material in general is much harder to encode since you have this very fast whip pan sometimes, and then it's very still. So it's very hard for the encoder to estimate how much bitrate it's supposed to spend on this frame, since you don't know if it's going to pan 180 degrees the next frame. So that's the quality encoding problem we see, that right now it's very hard finding a middle ground between bitrate and the waste CPU usage to doing a best quality, like kind of sweet spot. But the good thing about being Twitch is that if we do something wrong, or if something does something wrong, we get to hear it very fast. Just bring up Twitter and it shows very fast. So it's nearly faster than internal dashboards. And that's a good thing, since we can very easily understand what does affect our audience, when do people think it's bad, when do people think it's good, what do they think is bad, do they care much about video quality, or do they care about stuttering, buffering, what's the important aspects for us. So we're lucky enough to have that kind of direct feedback with our customers. And we also have the chat, which is a Twitch thing. We have a chat where we buy the player, where people type, and it's a big thing about our experience. And people are really, really vocal about what they think. So if something is wrong, both the broadcasters get to know it in real time, and we get to know it in real time.
Yeah. And I think it was really interesting to hear about some of the challenges about actually measuring quality and doing that in a seamless way across different devices, different networks. Could each of you talk a little bit about some of those specific challenges and the solutions that you've put in place to actually measure quality and do it in a consistent, seamless way? You want to start?
Right, I'll start again.
Yeah.
We've been working with third parties to do this, and you can think of all your traditional people in that space they all have solutions, and so it's still, as I said before, it's an evolving thing for us, but we do look at those quality metrics. We've standardized on one vendor for right now, but we're always evaluating other alternatives, and sort of corroborating them with maybe a second or third. The challenge is how many things can you put into a player to measure? At some point, it gets to be too heavy. So the other thing we look to do too is to try to benchmark ourselves against people who we consider to be leaders in the space. And usually we can use those third-party metrics that we have and anonymously put our data against theirs. We won't know who they are, but we can say, hey, here's where you look like in that quartile, and that's the best we can do in our space right now.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question here or in the end?
Sure. Yeah.
So I think, especially for linear delivery, I mean, Steve, or maybe you can answer the question. If you have a customer complaint, what are the tools that you have and where you can point, where the issue is and respond to that in real time?
So do you mean in terms of if you're a content provider and you're delivering your own experience?
Right.
Sure. I mean, I think Eric would have a unique perspective.
Yeah, I think I'll answer it. I'm sure you guys have some perspective on that as
Yeah.
well. So, any one customer, usually not so great of a feedback loop, but we have a very good customer feedback loop in our organization. So if we see a bunch of things coming in, I wouldn't call it real time, but it's damn close to it. It'll get escalated into my engineering team, and then we start to go through some basic troubleshooting skill sets. But most of those tools that we built out are either we use some of the third-party vendor ones to narrow it down, or we've used some of the custom ones we had. To give you an example, ran into this probably 2 weeks ago. We started seeing random reports, very random reports of people just freezing up. And so we started diagnosing, looking through our regular tool sets. Our average streams, our bit rates didn't change, our number of restarts didn't significantly change. And then we were able to actually reproduce it and figured out that one of our 8 formats on a certain CDN, one of their streams was down. We had to go work with them to get it back up. So it's an interesting way. Some of these things.
The forensic work basically for each of the events you really have to dig down, right? Because you have so many, you have different CDN provider, you have different local provider, and then you have your own equipment, right?
Right, and yeah, you do have to kind of, it's just like anything else, start, narrow things down, and if you have multiple vendors, you have multiple problems to solve, right? Or exponential number of things you have to check. So, it'd be nice to have this great palette of lots of multiple vendors, but it becomes unmanageable at some point too. And so, we try to, in the streaming space, we're keeping about 3 vendors, and that's it. That's about as much as I can manage.
So Jonas, it was interesting when you were touching on Twitch about the social media aspect of it.
Here's a quick.
So I would say, to understand it, you would have to look at trends. So you can't look at individual complaints, because everyone will have individual problems, and it's mostly due to their connection or their problems. But if you look at trends, it's very easy to see. Right now, a surprising amount of people have a problem here, so it might be a problem internally. And if you take that into account and look what are they complaining about, it's usually very easy to see where the problem lies and kind of find it. Since Twitter has this very, for Twitter for example, you can see, okay, there's the people are complaining are from Europe, or the people complaining are from the US. So using that data to kind of narrow down the problem is extremely effective, because you can understand where your audience are, and this is very real time.
I see that trends are, I think either if you have something really major going on, right? If you're somebody paying you $20, $30 a month, right, and their TV is not working on OTT, you have to address that issue. Maybe the neighbor is fine, or there's no macro trend.
That's true.
So that's where, maybe more better diagnostic tools are probably needed, and I was wondering if that exists today or.
Well, it's actually a fairly good segue, I think, to the last item that we wanted to talk about. And Lionel, maybe we'll start with you on this. Is what's your perspective around what's lacking in the solutions in the marketplace, right? So specifically with the feedback that you're getting from customers about what they want, there's no good solution that scales.
That's a very good question. So monitoring is not something which is done well today, because as Eric said, and we see a lot of customers having only metrics on the players It's not enough because most of our customers have multiple CDNs. They have their encoders feeding the OTT infrastructure, but also feeding, in some cases, the live linear infrastructure as well. So you need to put probes everywhere. And it's always a trade-off between how much you can invest in the monitoring solution versus, oh, it's good enough, we can live with that. So today there is, I don't know any good solution on the market that could aggregate all those probes and provide a consistent information so that you can know immediately where the problem is. So we can help with that, but we're not an IQ vendor. And I would love to see some disruptive and innovative solutions that could really provide user-friendly metrics for that.
Free content is still kind of a little bit easier to handle, right? Because people may come back or may not come back. But when they subscribe content, it really needs more deterministic response.
Yes. If you paid for a service, you must have the service. But the problem is you may, especially for OTT, depending on the geographic location. I mean, I'm living in the US, so I may pay my service in the US, but next week I will be in Europe, and the service may be down. I don't care. Even if they have 3 or 4 different CDNs, I paid for the service, so I want to have the service while I'm in Paris or New York or Portland.
Jonas, you want to share your perspective on what you'd like to see?
Well, for us, it would be good if we could see. Our biggest problem with smaller broadcasters, they figure it out themselves. They have the computers, they can do it. Like bigger broadcasters, they get this expensive elemental encoders, and they work great for us. But right now, there's no good solutions for this in-between broadcasters. I think a lot of people may fit into this category. Like you're not this big linear TV house, but you're not this small guy in his bedroom either. And for those people today, taking the kind of step, buying this expensive hardware is still a lot to do. So people kind of tend to go for the cheaper software solution, which isn't as stable as real hardware solutions. So finding the kind of in-between things, so stuff that has emerged in the switcher market, like the ATEM and stuff like that, it hasn't really happened in this encoder market yet. And that's something we're really looking forward to see, some kind of in-between price point encoder that is affordable for medium broadcasters, because that would help our broadcasters with a stable solution.
And Eric, how about you?
So I think I kind of alluded to that a little. I think you got to, if you want to own the experience, you're going to have to build the tools right now. I don't think you can depend on others. It'd be nice. We're pushing our vendors constantly to get better systems in place to detect this before us. Unless you're really going to specialize in this space, you will probably never be able to staff enough to build the tools to every single user. So I think in some ways that's a shared responsibility between you and the vendors who you use to provide this data to the end user. And we didn't really touch on it a ton, but the U.S. is one thing. When you get out of the U.S. and start to go to other places in the world, your experiences will vary widely, right? To state the obvious. We find lots of challenges in Asia, as well as South America, specifically.
Great. At this time, I think we've got some time for Q&A. So if anyone's got any questions, if you could just ask it, and I'll be sure to repeat it.
Okay,
Yes.
Find the Twitter, monitoring the Twitter very telltale what the user's experiencing, and I guess you can tell regionally where they're coming from. Are you able to correlate that at all with knowing they're your viewers and that you know what their device types are, and you might be able to figure out, like in Eric's case, that it's a certain combination of a device type and a stream being delivered to it that's the problem? Are you able to do that now or today?
Yeah.
Right. As Twitch works today, the broadcaster's stream is actually fed directly to the consumer. So we do transcoding on it, but we also feed the incoming stream directly to the consumer. So in some cases, if they configure their encoder wrong, it will not work on certain devices, which we report to the broadcaster, but sometimes they don't look. And being able to kind of get that data, I would say it's possible, but it's hard today. There's no good solution in place, but we internally rely on other metrics for that. We have in the player, we have a reporting tool. We can report problems. So if we see that, for example, a large percentage of people are reporting problems on iOS, or for example, Android on this channel, we can kind of correlate that, okay, people are complaining and we're getting reports from this device, then it's to draw a conclusion. But just judging from social media, it's usually hard to get that info because people usually don't tell what device they have. They just want the problem to be fixed. So it's hard. But
You can't tie anything from that base to...
No, you will have to rely on other metrics for that, sadly.
I think also something to answer your question. It may be something which is linked to the encoder, but it may also be linked to the external systems. I mean, for example, you can have a DRM key server that is not responsive anymore because it's just down, and you can have a lot of different devices or different regions not getting access to the DRM key server. And I think it's if we talk about convergent infrastructure for live linear and OTT, the DRM stuff may be only related to OTT, and you don't want to change your encoder parameters. So that's why splitting out the origin packager from the encoders is also a way to mitigate the risk.
Very good.
Great. Any other questions?
We've got somebody right over here.
Yes.
Questions, one for Eric and one for Lionel. Eric is about the contribution. So from my understanding of linear TV, if you broadcast a live event, you usually have the expensive contribution encoder that is 422 10-bit. Just do whatever thing because you have the bandwidth. You want to get the best content into the studio. There at the head end, you do the transcoding then for the distributed. So for the internet CDN, is that the same model that with regard to the contribution, is that the same technology, or is the different, like a cheaper version of the contribution, but get transcoded in a centralized transcoding farm and deliver the HLS to the end user?
Okay, for us, we started down a path where we were taking something that was less than what we were putting out for our linear and using that to encode. We switched that a few years ago. It's when we did our HDS upgrade in our studios themselves, and we now take the same feed and sort of wire it off and encode that and take those bit rates and use those as what we want to stream. Now that said, we're not a baseball game. We're a bunch of talking heads, so we're not going to give you 4K because it's you're not going to see the difference. But we are putting out pretty decent streamed bit rate size for those devices that will support it. Apple TV is very good at supporting very high bandwidth streams, and we're going to take. We have 780 out there now. I think we're going to go up to 1080i type feeds over digital within the next month or two. Not sure what you're going to get for that, quite frankly, but you'll be able to see people's ties a little bit better.
A second question is for Lion. You talk about ad insertion, and also you're talking about moving the ad insertion from the client side to the server side. And again, sort of compared to the linear and TV scenario, it's usually they have in the source, they have the Softie 35. So basically putting the spliceable point, and the head end will basically putting the ad. So it's the operator receive the sales command, basically put ad into. So for the internet, I guess the HTTP-based streaming, is that similar? Is there an international standard like Softie 35 or just something each station?
That's a very good question. So SCSI35 is it's embedded in the MPEG-TS streams. When you go OTT over HTTP, there is no standard even for HLS or HDS. Or for HDS, actually, there is a standard because Adobe is providing the primetime ecosystem with client-side ad insertion, so they have their own standard. But for HLS or MPEG-Dash, it's much more challenging. And that's why we think providing it on the server side before the packaging tier is the way to go, because you can insert, we take, in our solution, there are many other solutions on the market, but for the elemental solution, we can take the SCSI35 markers for the MPEG-TS streams, and we can have our own markers, if you wish, and depending on depending on the client, depending on the device, depending on whatever, we can replace the content server-side before packaging it in HLS, Smooth, Dash, HTS, etc. So there are two advantages. The first one is we can support any device on the market because we're not depending on the clients. And the second thing is all about user experience. By doing that, there is no reloading. It's inserted. We are mimicking the live linear experience. If you do that on the client side, when you're switching from the regular channel to the ads, the regular content stops. Then you have a black screen. Then you have some loading. Then you have an aspect ratio change. So the user experience is not good at all. And doing that server side is much better.
And just to kind of a follow-up question to that, I mean, Lionel, what are your thoughts around how that actually, by doing this server side, right, taking that intelligence out of the client, running it in the cloud on a server, actually provides more seamless visibility into performance?
Yes, and once again, we have less and less control over the devices used by the customers. So you need to provide the same experience across all the devices. And between Apple TV and Android smartphones, you have different sizes, different protocols. All the ecosystem is totally different. So if you can streamline your workflows and have it all managed inside the network, it's finally easier and more cost-effective as well.
Sure.
Does doing the ad insertion before the packager affect the ability to do per-user targeted ads?
So that's a very good question. If you do that before the packaging, yes, you limit the personalization of the ads. But you don't necessarily have the packaging tier on the origin. We can deploy the packaging tier on the edge servers. And if we do that on the edge servers, we can provide scalability and address millions of users for every pop, really. That's another reason why separating the encoding from the packaging is the best architecture you can have.
Any other questions?
Yes, Steve.
This one, well, you can't see me. I'm over here.
How are you?
This question for Jonas, it goes back to Matthew's presentation last year, where you spoke about how you moved from both Flash and HLS to a pure HLS environment. And one of the challenges you saw was you introduced a lot of delay for people on desktops. So the chat will be between 30 and 60 seconds delayed. So, and you said at that time that would be an issue you would continue to chip away at. And what strides have you taken since then to kind of limit that or make that better?
We have improved it a lot, actually. Right now, I can't. Do you know the exact number, Matt?
Between 20 and 30 average right now.
Yeah. So we've been doing optimization on it. I think there's an optimization launching soon, actually, that will even further scale this down. It's very important for us to have a very low latency because the chat is very bound to the kind of experience of Twitch. So you chat to the broadcaster and they read it and they kind of interact back and forth. There was even a game where the chat kind of played a game of Pokemon. So they typed in inputs and the game responded and kind of moved around. So you had 100,000 people simultaneously playing the same game. So you can do very interactive stuff. So it's an important aspect for us, and we're constantly trying to get the latency down in terms of HLS. And I think they've done some recent strides on it, but I don't know. I can't say exact numbers.
We've still got time. Any other questions? Sure.
So you mentioned that you hit 4K. So is the upgrade software only, or you have to with the iron?
So, well, once again, it depends on the technology providers. We do software only 4K, leveraging GPUs because we have solutions using appliances in which we have a combination between GPUs and CPUs, or we have VMs, or we have our cloud platform. And our cloud, we can also have GPUs. And using the GPUs, we can do 4K even with adaptive bitrate on one rack unit. So.
But that's way lower than what your current throughput is for SD or something, right?
Well, with 4K, usually you go HEVC. And with HEVC, you have half the bandwidth of H.264. So 4K would be 4 times 1080p. But with HEVC, it's only twice the bitrate you would have on 1080p H.264. So basically, the bitrates we're seeing, usually 4K is for very high premium content, sport content, maybe video games in a couple of years. So you have a lot of details. And so it's high-end encoding. And what we see with our customers, it's around 15 megabits per second for 4K HEVC. 15 megabits per second.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, thanks again. I want to thank everyone for participating on the panel and for all of you for showing up. I hope this was helpful, and we appreciate your time and participation.
Right.